My mom left Macon when I finished kindergarten. We moved to Jacksonville, Florida, but we weren't the only family moving from Macon to Jacksonville that summer. You see, the widows and the first wives of the original Allman Brothers had bonded, and when the time came, they all moved together. So along with my mom, Barry's widow, Big Linda, and their daughter Brittany, Dwayne's widow, Donna, and their daughter Galadriel, and Donna's sister Joan, who was also roadie Mike Callahan's ex, and their daughter Rachel. All of us moved to Jacksonville at the same time. We all settled near the beach, and for the next 3 years, we were part of this big, extended family. And Brittany, Galadriel, and Rachel were like sisters to me. When my mom remarried and we moved to Nashville, Joan and Rachel moved with us. But Donna and Galadriel and Big Linda and Brittany, they had their own adventures, and it would be a while before I saw them again. Before I go on, I think it might help to paint a picture of who I was as a kid. For starters, I was a teeny guy. Until 10th grade, I was the shortest and the skinniest guy in my class. I was hyperactive, overexcitable, overly earnest, and painfully sensitive. I was not capable of receiving playful ribbing or constructive criticism. I would just fall apart. When I was 11 or 12, there was a big Macon reunion organized in Nashville. For several days at the Exit Inn, there was music and food and family, but most important to me, Brittany and Galadriel came, and all us kids got together again. But where I had grown hyper and dorky, Brittany and Galadriel, to my eyes, had grown so amazingly cool and together and beautiful that I hardly knew how to talk to them. They were all about this alternative music that I knew absolutely nothing about. Every once in a while, they would hit on some band that I had seen on MTV, like the Talking Heads, and I would pipe up and say, oh yeah, I saw that video. It was pretty cool, huh, guys? They might have mentioned Joy Division. It wouldn't surprise me. I just don't remember. This was my first tangential exposure to the concept of an alternative music scene, and I still associate aspects of this music with the Macon reunion at the Exit Inn in Nashville. Midway through my 7th grade year, my family moved to Central Florida. Joan and Rachel did not, and I don't blame them. Who'd want to move from Nashville to a dry county in the middle of nowhere with only cows and orange groves for scenery? No, they moved to Atlanta. For me, what this move meant was, in the years when I was developing my own personal musical taste, I was just about as far as possible from any place trendy. Put it this way, when I got myself a Grateful Dead t-shirt and wore it to school for the first time, I had people ask me if they were a heavy metal band. For those formative years, my sources of music were Q105 and Z93 out of Tampa, my mom's record collection, MTV, and also the local UHF station out of Lakeland, V32, which showed videos, and conversations with my dad. So I got turned on to Eric Johnson and John McLaughlin, the mothers of invention and the band of gypsies, blues, folk, jazz, psychedelic rock. And I started getting serious about guitar and serious about music, and I made this music a part of my personality. And then I moved to Tallahassee and started college. I made all these friends who were musicians and artists, club owners and DJs at V89, the FSU college station. And suddenly, every night that I went to see local music and every party that I went to had this music by these bands that I'd never heard of. Bauhaus, The Cure, The Smiths, Sonic Youth, Violent Femmes, and Joy Division. To my self-righteous, serious musician ears, what I was hearing was overly wrought, overly precious, and most importantly to me, amateurish, poorly executed music. That's how it all struck me at the time. I hated pretty much all of it. I judged other people for listening to it. I argued with my friends and my girlfriends about it, and I did everything I could to avoid all of it. What I'm learning about myself now is that I have existed for too long with too many assumptions and too many prejudices, and it's time for me to put some actual music to these black and white wavy lines that I saw hanging from the walls of pretty much every apartment I visited while I was in college. When I first heard the drums and the bass intro to the opening track, Disorder, I was right back in Tallahassee again. This felt very familiar. Not the actual notes themselves, but the approach for sure. See, when I spent those hours and hours in high school sequestered in my room learning music, I was learning that real music had concepts like chord changes and form, verses, choruses and bridges, intros, solos, and endings. It was music you could understand with diatonic theory and music you could improvise over once you had that understanding. But Joy Division's music, and in fact most of the music that I reacted so negatively to in college, that music is made up of a set of discrete, sometimes arbitrary seeming parts. The drums play a set length phrase that repeats, sometimes with embellishments or fills, until the next section starts. Same for the bass. The guitar and keyboard might be single note lines, might be noise, it might be power chords or partial chords, but they are still composed and arranged like discrete parts. Sometimes the parts aren't executed well and sometimes they are. Sometimes they relate musically to the other parts and sometimes they don't. Sometimes the vocal line fits with the instruments. And all those nights in Tallahassee, listening to this kind of music came back to me with disorder. I didn't hate it as much this time. Maybe I didn't hate it at all. I made myself listen. Parts of it made me laugh. In fact, like when Peter Hook tried to extend the bass line lower than the lowest note on the instrument, and he just ended up playing the low open E even though it didn't work in the song. Some of it was musically interesting. It definitely set a mood. Speaking of mood, I need to talk a little bit about She's Lost Control, about what happens musically in the song. I'll try and get my point across without getting too deep into theory. If you look at individually at the bass, vocal, and guitar parts, each one consists of a perfectly suitable and musical phrase in E flat minor. But when you put them together, they don't fit perfectly with each other. This creates some really intense dissonances. Let's break it down. So for example, here's the bass line. And here's the guitar part. Each one is, like I said, completely acceptable by itself, but look what happens when they're played together. Specifically, let's concentrate on the last bar of the phrase. I will put all the notes together on one instrument so you can hear what is actually being played. That's out. Look, there are times when I'm looking to put together something angular, dissonant, or otherwise musically askew. I mean, I've written some weird notes in my time. But I have to remember the lesson that She's Lost Control is teaching me here. Dissonance doesn't necessarily have to come from giant altered chords or 12-tone rows. Dissonance is, at its core, about relationships. The parts themselves don't have to be particularly complex for them to create a lot of tension when combined. It's a good lesson to learn. Something else interesting I am hearing in Unknown Pleasures. There is a lot of Doors influence in this album. On Day of the Lords and Candidate, definitely, but to a lesser extent on most of the album. For example, there's a vocal affect that both Jim Morrison and Ian Curtis lean on heavily. What happens when you have to keep the vocal melody simple is that you end up relying a lot on the 5 and the 1, since those two notes will pretty much always fit no matter what else is going on. That fifth drop from 5 to 1 with some little microtonal wavering is something that appears all over this album. When will it end? And I guess there's some giant irony here. The fact that the Doors tried their hardest to extend rock to include jazz elements. But here's Joy Division, and even though they borrowed so much of their sonic palette from the Doors, the music is pretty actively not jazz influenced. But what of Unknown Pleasure's influence on me? Once I get these songs, what have I got? I've been in some amazing places with some amazing people and had less than amazing experiences. Warehouses converted into lofts in Railroad Square. Among the sculptors, the artists, the hippies, staying up until 5 a.m. after a show to hang with friends, being introduced to beautiful and amazing people, talking about art, philosophy, Bob Dobbs, the new Almodovar film, someone getting brave enough to dare George to pierce his ear. And here I am, not drinking, not smoking, and getting more and more uptight as the night goes on because I disapprove of the music. That was me. It took me until now to force myself to actually hear what's going on in this music. Of course it's amateurish. That's the entire point. Since when are you required to have a professionally trained artist to have an emotion or a point of view? These songs express themselves and do so beautifully. There's absolutely something here. The mood it creates is powerful, but also very specific, and that's another irony. If I could impart my newfound understanding of this music to my 21-year-old self, then perhaps I could save those nights in Railroad Square among the artists and hippies, or those nights in the house down High Street behind the giant hedges, or that one time in the brick apartment above the music store, or the dozens of other times I was a sullen downer needlessly. If I could convince myself that it was okay to get over myself for a minute and actually meet this music halfway, not only might I have a broader appreciation for the post-punk musical mindset, but I would also have had a lot fewer nights resenting and arguing with my friends. But now that I have this appreciation, that doesn't actually mean that I've found new music to add to my regular rotation. I don't see myself throwing on Unknown Pleasures while doing the dishes or folding laundry. This is music for an unsure 21-year-old who still feels deeply about everything. Music of self-doubt, casting about, and becoming. Once you're a middle-aged, jaded misanthrope like me, the best that this music can do is throw you back to that time. These songs are all exposition, and after a while, you learn how they end. I don't know. Maybe I needed those thousands of hours alone in my room, learning every single note of the inner mounting flame to be the best musician that I could possibly be. But hey, if I ever told you your music was dumb to your face, I'm truly remorseful. I am. Galadriel and Brittany, maybe if I knew how not to be a complete spaz at age 12, maybe I could have actually learned something from you that weekend at the Macon reunion. I don't know, though. I think it was easier for me to learn guitar than it was for me to learn how not to be a complete dork. I'm still working on that last one.